I'm honored tonight to introduce Bollywood screenwriter Shibani Bathija, who's changing the face of Bollywood cinema one movie at a time. Before I, oh, okay. Before I begin, I must say that not even the threat of a British Airways strike stopped her from being here today. So when she thought that her flight may get canceled, she still did everything she could to be with us. So that should make us especially honored.
It's great to be here. It really has been wonderful. Thank you.
Shibani's success lies in her quest to tell unconventional stories. And since 2006, everything she's touched has turned to gold. Her first screenplay was the blockbuster Fanaa, followed by the super hit film Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna. 3 of her 4 films are on the highest list of the top grossing movies, Bollywood movies of all time. Her latest film, My Name is Khan, reunited her with director Karan Johar and actors Shahrukh Khan and Kajol, all legends in Bollywood. We'll start the Q&A with a few questions from me, and we'll turn the floor to the audience for questions. Please just raise your hand if you have a question, and I will be replaying the questions for YouTube broadcast. So as mentioned, this entire event, the Q&A will be taped for YouTube broadcast. So if you have friends and family you'd like to share this event with, you can send them the link after it's online. And with that, please welcome Shibani Bathija.
Thank you, everyone. It's been great to be here.
So Shibani, your latest film, My Name is Khan, has been embraced by audiences in all parts of the world. It is the highest grossing Bollywood movie in the Middle East as well as the UK, and the second highest grossing in the US. Many of the circumstances seen in the film have also been seen or portrayed in real life. What motivated you to write this very timely movie? And why do you think audiences have reacted so strongly?
Actually, the idea for setting a story in post 9/11 in the post 9/11 world, seen through the eyes of a Muslim protagonist, was Karan's idea. The director Karan Johar, and it was something that he wanted to do, and he started off with a slightly different story, but we worked together to actually bring it to what you see today. But really, he needs to have credit to have the foresight and also the appetite and the gumption to actually take on something like this. And I'm very glad that he asked me to write it. I'll always be grateful to him for that.
Great. So the original version of the film, different from the version we saw today, some think contained depictions of African Americans that were controversial. Some thought the representation inaccurately portrays present-day America. Those scenes have been cut in the international version. What was your intention when creating these characters, and were you surprised by the response?
I think that for me as a writer, talking about it purely from a storytelling point of view, the fact that this man takes on this sort of quixotic mission of trying to meet the President of the United States and say, my name is Khan and I'm not a terrorist, required him to be a certain way. Yes, and also required him to, in his own way, do something which would bring him to the attention of the president. Now, if this was an Indian film, perhaps set in India, usually hunger strikes work. But considering that it was, transpiring in the United States, I really felt that he needed to do something that would be that special. And also it was really important for him to do something that united people. That brought together people from different walks of life within the mainstream country in a way that was special and very and humanitarian. Hence the idea of basing it in a somewhat contemporary event, around Katrina and the fact that it happened in the United States, an event that people all over the world knew about, an event that would be well understood by even by, to some degree, by Indian audiences, because the tsunami happened, and so this idea of being trapped in a weather situation, where there's a lot of devastation, all sort of stemmed from that. And that was really the intention. Statistically speaking, and as research bears out, the poorest portion areas in this country, some of the poorest areas, happen to be in the south. They happen to be rural, and they happen to be predominantly African American. This is not something that I came up with, or Karan came up with. It's there in the statistics. So that's how the setting came about. So I'm actually, since I haven't talked to every single person that has this comment, my question usually is that, are you responding to the visual interpretation of it, or are you responding to the fact that such a thing could happen, or such placement, in the country is anachronistic or wrong in some way? Because as far as I could, as far as I understood, as far as I could discover, it was very much within the realm of possibility, as I explained. So, but since there was a fair amount of debate over this, the version that you've seen today, the shorter version of the film, does not have a lot of that representation. Does it make the film better? Does it or does it just sort of allow people to not be just led away by something, that one portion of the greater whole, that they didn't quite like? I'm not sure. That really is for audiences to tell. But there was no intention either on my part, or certainly not on the part of the production or of Karan, to in any way hurt feelings or sensibilities, or to misrepresent anything. Also, there's a cultural lens through how a director from one country, or people from one country, may see the reality of another country. Like Slumdog, for instance, it was very well received, say, in the United States, but not so much in India, because Indians felt, that's not us, that's not how it is, that's a stereotype. So that happens a lot as well, because it is someone from another culture taking on another situation, another country. Often there will be that discrepancy. But really, the film is about the core of humanity, and this man and his ability to love despite all. And if that's what stayed with people, and if that's what they could take home, then I hope that our job is done.
Okay. Thank you. So to switch gears for a little bit, my next question is about the reaction from American Muslims. So by and large, American Muslims have reacted incredibly positively to this film. But there have been some people unhappy with what they perceive is a good Muslim versus bad Muslim dynamic, where the protagonist, Rizwan Khan, is the only good Muslim in the film. So, for example, people were upset that when a mosque was depicted, it was the only time when terrorists, for example, were seen in the mosque. There were no other representations of a place of worship for Muslims. So what are your thoughts when you hear this kind of reaction?
I think that's perhaps taking a bit of a narrow view, because the whole principle of the film is there's good people and there's bad people, and there's good people who do good for others and bad people who do bad to others, and that's the only difference between them. So I think of every religion and racial representation that you'll find in the film, if you take each scene apart, you'll find good and bad represented on equally on both sides. So it's not only that Rizwan is good, his sister-in-law is good, his brother is good, his mother is good. So those are all the key characters in the film, and they're all good practicing Muslims. The particular scene that you talked about is again representative of a lot of research and a lot of discussion with people, who said that there are certain places where that sort of harbor or at least turn a blind eye to activities of recruitment, and they very often happen to be they use the place of worship as a refuge and misuse that space of worship because there isn't constant monitoring. You see, so that's actually what was going on, rather than saying that, oh, it's like everybody that goes to a mosque is like that, because that's sort of a narrow view to take of it. Whereas, I mean, and the fact of the matter is that Rizwan prays when it's his time to pray, no matter where he is. So a building actually does not to him represent the best of the religion or the only way to practice his religion. It is a daily part of life. It's a daily process. It's a way of living, which is really key to what Islam is anyway.
Okay, thank you. So another question that I had is about your work in the movie industry. So the movie industry for Bollywood and Hollywood can be a tough place for females. What has been your experience with this in Bollywood, and have you had to overcome any obstacles while pursuing your career?
I have been very fortunate because the two houses that I started working with, both Yashraj Films and Dharma Productions, which is the producers of My Name Is Khan as well, are run by people that to whom talent and dedication and the work that you put in is much more importance than gender. And so I personally can't speak for this because I've been fortunate where it has not been an issue. But I have heard other stories from other people where it has been. And honestly, this is something that's sort of one battle at a time, one day at a time, and one project or contract at a time. The fact remains that there are many more women actively working in the industry behind the cameras, whether it's in directors or as writers, now than there was, say, 10 years ago. So that's actually a positive sign, and hopefully a sign of things to come and changes to come.
Great. So my last question I had before I open it to the audience was just about your next work and what you are working on next. So as big fans of your work, we'd love to hear what your latest project is, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I've done actually a couple of scripts post the completion of writing of My Name Is Khan. One of them is a screwball in the tradition of old Hollywood screwballs, which I absolutely love, and have not. It's a genre that hasn't really been explored in the Hindi context. And so I took a break from something intense, and sort of emotional, like My Name Is Khan, and wrote something that was completely mad and fun, and it was very therapeutic. So that's one, and the other one is a sort of youth film, which is sort of takes a look at issues that youth in India have with more traditional parents and more traditional expectations versus the world they live in right now. So both are very special to me in different ways, and hopefully they will be up and running and be brought to all of you very soon.
Great. So love to open up the floor to the audience. Just had wanted to start everything with a few questions I had. If you guys had any questions along the line of what I already addressed or anything Shibani had specifically mentioned, like I said, just kind of raise your hand and say your question. I'll repeat it for our YouTube audience. Don't be shy. Okay, up in the front. His question was just when Shibani's writing her films, how much of that comes really from her own experiences in her own life?
To address your question specifically, the events that transpire and being sort of either Asian descent or brown skin, as you said, and what that and the impact of that. I've been fortunate where I haven't had anything particularly untoward happen to me. I've heard that often is because women get less of it, than men do in general, which is the opposite gender bias, I suppose. But I do remember this one time where we were here researching, and we went to a small suburban town, which shall remain unnamed for the larger part, because it was an interesting experience. And it's a very homogenous, very sort of upscale, sort of very pretty town, and myself and Karan and my co-dialogue writer, Niranjan, were just, sort of walking around and trying to see if this was a good place to shoot. And we got these really strange sort of looks, and people were not being very friendly, which is odd for Northern California, And I just wondered, I was like, why is this happening? Because I haven't really experienced that, in the time that I studied in San Francisco either. And then I figured it out. The fact was that it was a 9/11 anniversary. We happened to be in this town, three obviously brown-skinned people or from Asian descent wandering in obviously an anomalously in a place where we wouldn't normally be, in the middle of the day. So what it actually told me, actually more than the discriminatory side of it, was that how much fear there is, and there was fear on both sides. I actually had a scene in the film which is not actually shot or in the film, where it's a BART station, and there's a Molana, there's a priest, from the mosque who's wearing his tradition outfit, and he's just approaching this bench, to wait for the next train to come. And from the other side, there's a guy who's just done with his baseball practice, just coming, and he has his bat, and there was this moment where the priest looks at the bat, and he's afraid. And the man with the bat looks at the priest with his robes, and he's afraid. And they both walk away from the bench. And that was, to me, a thorough representation of mutual fear, which I think is often at the root of all of these incidences. And that particular incident that happened to us was, if anything, just demonstrative of that.
Yes, in the back. So the question is, how does your writing process start? Do you have a special muse that you recall from the heavens of the sky? And how involved is the director in this process?
It depends. With this particular film, Karan had an idea of what he wanted to do in terms of where he wanted to set it and the kind of story that he wanted to tell. But he was lovely, and once we'd sort of agreed that this was going to be the story of the film, he sort of just let me be, and just let me go and just write the story in an organic way. And not all directors will do that, and not all producers will do that. So I think it's very individual. It depends, I've been fortunate again in, working, writing scripts that come from my stories mostly, except for Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna, which was Karan's story, and it was mostly, his baby. I just was sort of being the part-time nanny along the way. But so. And so that makes it very organic, and as hokey and hooey and woo that this sounds, but I almost find that the characters talk to me, and there are days when they won't say anything, and those are days that there's writer's block, because the idea is not to make them say or behave a certain way, but to just let them unfold and just do what they would do by their character. So that's really an important part of my writing process.
Yeah, in the front. So the question is, the first part of that question is, why did you choose to end the life of a young child? And why was the protagonist made an autistic character and not someone who doesn't have an illness?
The thing is that, very often, okay, I'll back up. Part of our research that came up, there was a lot of stuff that happened in schools, and kids not really being able to filter, or to sort of pretend, would sort of, perhaps from what they heard from parents or from other people around them, actually takes things to heart and actually act out a lot more. So so the setting of that happening as a very, as a way that fear again, can permeate and actually percolate down to even to schools and to children, was very integral to how important it is to address the issue. And hence, it happens in a school. And of course, even for the story, for it happening to the child creates the larger impact, where an adult could be able to, absorb, take, move on. With a child, it's a different ballgame, and so that was very important to the story. And as far as Asperger syndrome, when we started out with this, and again, this came from research. Karan had met someone who actually just sort of said, he was a Muslim gentleman, and he said, sometimes I'm so frustrated. I wish I could just go tell the president that, look, I'm Muslim and I'm not a terrorist, And it was just a random comment, that he made, and so when Karan was telling me about this, I'm like, oh my God, wow, imagine if someone actually set out to do this. They actually set out to meet the president, and then I started working backwards, and I said, well, but what kind of a person would this be, right? And Karan's like, yeah, what kind of a person would this be? And so that's where his Asperger's came from, with someone who would take something literally, who would take on what was obviously said in anger, by his wife, but take it to heart and actually set out on this quixotic mission. And that's where the Asperger's came into play. But once I got into the Asperger's, a lot of that informed Rizwan, the character. So one thing informed the other, and then it informed, the previous thing. So it just sort of became this, hopefully, holistic approach to who he was and why he decides to do what he does.
Yes, question in the back.
Yes, sometimes I guess the only way I have to address that question actually is to talk about the process of writing. And often what happens is that that what is on paper becomes a roadmap to how things are taken forward. But there are decisions that are made, along the way, for whatever reason, for enhancing something, or to further demonstrate, or for passage of time, that may modify what that is, and more often than not, with skilled people behind the scenes like Karan and Shahrukh and the whole crew, those modifications will really work. For instance, that whole can we have sex now, Mandira, was something they came up with on the set, which was wonderful, and it works beautifully. For most people, they really enjoy that, and this perhaps was one of the things that didn't. That was a little anomalous. So you just kind of go with that a little bit, Not everything that you see on screen has actually been what's on paper. That's just it's the reality of my job, and the reality that actually a lot of audiences don't understand or can't see. The fact that that the final product is finally a group effort, and so that's what you go with, and as a group you say yes, that may not have been too right, but there are a lot of other things that were very right. So hopefully that balanced it out. Sorry, which one? Which one comes out in Hindi? Yes. No, there's a particular challenge with a film like this, which is it's basically a Hindi film, which has a lot of English, obviously, because it's based in the United States. So a lot of times there is a doubling. There is an English thing, which then either has a voiceover, which helps with the Hindi, or then has a Hindi sort of echo almost, so that audiences get that. Which is why the Bobby character, spoke in English, because he worked for PBC, an American channel. But the college students get an internship with ZTV or whatever, Star TV, whatever that was, which was a Hindi channel. So that at every point in time, there is both sides, represented. But this is a reality of doing a Hindi film, which has a lot of English in it. So these are things that one has to be careful of, just to make sure that as many people in the audience actually understand the important information that's given.
So the question was, why was Rizwan afraid of the color yellow? Was there some significance behind that?
Yes, actually, one of the with Asperger's, a strong reaction to a color could be one of the traits, and usually they're primary colors. So in his case, it was yellow. People have often demonstrated, similar reactions to, say, red. But it's very often a symptom with Asperger's.
I saw a question from you in the front.
Yes.
So the question is, where is Banville, and is it on Google Maps?
Yeah. Yes, actually, I had been to Danville, and not that So here's the thing. Banville, the town in the film, actually is not so representative of an actual city, and this is what transpires in this city, and this is how these people are, but more represent. It's more representative of any small suburban homogeneous town, and that's what's really important. So the fact that the town of Danville, which I actually quite enjoyed, was sort of stuck with me. And I had a friend from there who, talked about, in her instance, the being gay, and not being very accepted, in growing up, that it's kind of stayed with me, and it flowed into something else. But it's really more about a homogenous town, and a close-knit small community, and a reaction to something, sort of painful, in their lives.
Great. I think, yep, right in front. So the question is, once you have a story, how does it actually transition then onto the final product, and how are characters involved in all of that?
God, I wish I could say I cast this film. I'm just like, pick up the phone, say, hey, Shahrukh, hey, Kajol, do you want to do this film? No, that was not my department. That was very much Karan. And, and I'm glad that both of them were on board. But the advantage of actually knowing who your actors are going to be is that you can play to their strengths, and you can also work around some of the things that perhaps are expected of them, and you want to sort of break expectations. So in this case, I mean, the fact that Shahrukh has been so amazingly popular as a romantic hero, the way he looks at the heroine, the way he looks at her eyes, these are trademarks. I mean, he should get, he can get a patent on those, right? I mean, amazing, people love him for that. He's wonderful at doing it. But it would not have worked as well for Rizwan, because if we started seeing too much of Shahrukh Khan in Rizwan, then the believability, of his Asperger's, and the process that he follows, would perhaps have become a little less. So I because I knew it was going to be Shahrukh, I sort of, the enhancing of the not being able to look in the eye, him not being able to cry, because Shahrukh's wonderful tears are also worth patenting, and but it would have again been Shahrukh Khan, So there, people with Asperger's can't cry, it's Rizwan who can't. But the moment you take that away, then not only does it give him opportunities as an actor, to go into places that he doesn't usually have the opportunity to, but it also, as an audience, takes away the markers that that we've started looking for in a Shahrukh Khan film. So there's a great opportunity in that. And that being said, just seeing Mandira and Rizwan be Kajol and Shahrukh on screen was lovely, because they bring such an amazing energy and talent to making these characters believable.
Great. I think I saw a question back there. So the question was, where can you go to see the lovely view where Mandira proposes to Rizwan?
Actually, that spot is Corona Heights. The view may not be exactly like that, you know, and the fog is not that it doesn't comply quite as readily. But yeah, it has that sort of a spectacle to it, you know. On the right day, it will just give you that kind of feeling. So, but yeah, so if you climb up there on the top of Corona Heights, you can get a pretty spectacular view.
Great. And some questions, I think, back there at the very back. So the question is, why the Bay Area for the film?
So I could get a chance to come back to San Francisco, which I try to do every given opportunity. No, actually, the what to me really would appeal about San Francisco in particular is the fact that Mandira and Rizwan have a very quirky romance. I mean, it's not every day that you see, you know, see sort of a woman having, you know, a romantic relationship with somebody who, you know, she's not quite ready for, you know, and who's, you know, significantly different. So the flow of their romance had that sort of quirky, unpredictable quality, which I felt the city really enhanced, you know, because it allows that sort of, hey, anything can happen here, sort of feel to it. So that's why San Francisco, besides, of course, my love for it. But
Great. I think there's a question, yep, in the cap. So the question is, how did you get started as a writer, and do you want to venture into Hollywood?
I think I was always a writer in denial. uh, you know, I always loved reading, and it was very good at English composition growing up, but I didn't quite maybe have faith in myself, you know, enough to say that, wow, can I actually write, you know? But when I was working as an executive at Sony Television in India, I was working with a lot of it. My job involved working with a lot of writers because it was part of development, content development. And I think that's when I discovered the frustrated writer in me, because I was always expecting them to do things the way I wanted, the way I saw them, you know. And then I said, oh, that's so not fair, because you just want to write this, right? I mean, it's not about, you know, whether what they're doing is really great or not. So I decided not to do that, and not be an ogre, and started writing myself on weekends, and that's how the first script came about. That script never got made, you know. So for anybody who's wanting to write, either, you know, in the audience here or elsewhere, you know, just an attachment to know you always have a great attachment to the first thing you ever write, but you should start writing it knowing that nothing may ever happen to it, happen off it, you know. Because in retrospect, you know, I think Fanaa was a fantastic beginning. I couldn't have asked for anything better, but it wasn't the first thing I ever wrote. So that often happens, and you just have to, you know, sort of go with the flow, as far as that's concerned. And I forgot the second part of his question.
Hollywood. Are you interested?
Oh, in
in
Hollywood.
making films for Hollywood?
Yeah, I'm certainly interested in writing in the English language. It is my first language. Now, whether that would be a Hollywood production per se, or just an international production, you know, or an indie film, I don't know. I mean, probably the latter, you know. But because I've lived, you know, in the US for as long as I have, because my thinking mind and my processes are so geared towards the English language, that I think that I would be remiss if I didn't attempt at least to express that.
Maybe it can be about Google.
Maybe it can be about Google.
Great. Yes, see you right there. So the first question was, since this was more internationally distributed, did you have a different audience in mind when you wrote it and were creating it? The second question is, do you have any more projects with Karan Johar in the future?
Yes, actually did have a different audience in mind. I mean, it was always going to be a Hindi film, so your core audience is always going to be, you know, people that understand the language and are familiar with the culture and with the actors. I mean, that is always where you begin. But it was certainly something that because the scope of the story is so contemporary and yet so universal. We always hoped that it would be something that would touch people regardless of culture and country, and more on the basis of being part of the human race. And fortunately, we've been greatly successful in that, and I've had some wonderful emails and contacts from people from many different parts of the world, like Egypt and Syria and Indonesia and and Germany, and it's been really gratifying. As far as projects in the future, Karan has to only, sort of pick up the phone and say, I'm doing, I don't know, Space Invaders 3, and I'll be like, okay, when do we start? He's very special to me and has been, greatly instrumental in what, in doing work that I can believe in. So whenever he decides that, it's something he wants to do with me, I'm more than happy to do it.
Great. Yes, right there. So the question is, what was it like filming in San Francisco? A lot of the scenes in the movie have large crowds versus in New York and in India and other places.
I don't know about the crowds portion of it, but I had a wonderful experience shooting in San Francisco because my job was done. Everyone else was working. And it's always great to be in San Francisco. But more than that, I think that the people and the city are always very welcoming. I mean, there's a very easy, relaxed sort of setup in shooting in San Francisco, because there aren't great, huge crowds and lots of cars. And so just blocking off a portion or whatever is not, as much of a task as it can be in a New York or in a Bombay, So, and then the people are nice. I mean, I don't know. It's got to do with that cold air that comes off the bay, I suppose. I mean, people are just nice. So it made the process for us very, very smooth and just very, very fruitful.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. So, yeah, you in the front. So, like most Bollywood films, there are lots of dance sequences. So, why not in this film?
God, imagine if Rizwan in the middle of all of this had to break out into a breakdance. My God, how would that be? So it was a conscious decision, because there was it was important for it, for the topic that we addressed, is this. More than a serious issue, it's an emotional issue, and it's a sensitive issue for a lot of people. So we didn't want to sort of trivialize it in any way or create a situation where it just becomes unbelievable and laughable, in any way, because that would just be terrible. So yes, it was a conscious decision, because the idea really behind this film is, you have 1 billion Muslims in the world, of which and I'm being, this is a generous number, maybe 5 million, maybe, and then this is a very, very generous number, maybe involved in, say, subversive activities and there's 995 million people, at the very least, that don't get a representation or a voice in mainstream cinema, either in the East or in the West. And this was our motive, behind this story and getting it out there. So we just didn't want to actually take on anything that would take away from this or trivialize it in any way. So hence the only mini dance at the wedding where he would dance.
Great. Last question. Okay, so you in the back. So the question was, why did Rhys not go to the authorities straight away or call 911 when Sam was first injured and then ultimately killed?
I think this is much more to do with a psychological thing than it has to do with a logical thing, because Rhys is actually going through some sort of post-traumatic stress in a sense, because his father's died. So his reaction to Sam in any case is not normal. It's not what he would normally react to. That compounded with having lost a parent and being confronted by older boys, and under the peer pressure of, if you tell, you had it from us, and your family can be threatened. He has one mother, So on Rhys, it's really a combination of those things plus guilt. The fact that, and somewhere on some level, he feels that he's brought this on Sam. If he had not confronted him, or if he had not talked, sort of said that he wasn't talking to him, the boys would not have intervened, and this would not have happened. So from Rhys's perspective, it's much more of a psychological thing, of fear and guilt, and the traumatic stress of having lost a parent. So although logically and practically he can pick up the phone, but in the mental and emotional state that he is, he can't. So that's really the basis of where that comes from.
Great, thank you. And with that, we'll end. We'd like to thank Shibani once again for spending the evening with us.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming to the film. For everybody that did enjoy it, and I know that Googlers have their tentacles all over the world. Please tell friends and well-wishers to actually find it and watch it, because we feel it's the story and a message that if it can go out to as many people as possible, the better it will be. So thank you.
Thanks.